a couple more things before we
Hmm.
cut out. First, I wanted you to tell that story about your grandmother.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Uh, she was grew up. Her family had escaped from the Trail of Tears, and they had left. Then they had moved. They lived originally down there in the area where sort of in the area where the present Cherokee Reservation is now. That's up there in the Smoky Mountains. There in western North Carolina, and they had left there and moved to the north, and were living near a little place called Seven Devils, North Carolina, and which is not too terribly far from Grandfather Mountain, which there was a big Scottish community there at Grandfather Mountain. And if I remember right, Seven Devils is like southwest of Grandfather Mountain. But anyway, this was back in the 1880s, something like that, and she was like in the neighborhood of around 13 years old or something like that. And the way the story went was that she was out gathering berries and stuff like that down in a creek bottom, and I don't know what kind of berries it would have been, or I don't know if she was picking blackberries or wild blueberries or what it was. All I know is she was gathering berries, and she had a basket with her. And anyway, up on the ridge, I think it was like to the west of her or northwest of her or something like that, she heard a rifle shot, or it might have been more than one. I don't remember right off the top of my head. But anyway, she heard some shooting. And then she heard somebody running down the ridge, coming down the ridge at running real fast. Well, at that time, and she'd heard some shouting and yelling, and it was obviously, white guys up there, and at that time in the 1880s, it was not good for a 13-year-old Cherokee Indian squaw to be caught out in the woods by a bunch of white guys. So she hid under some bushes, and anyway, and she's watching and looking in the direction that she hears something running down the hill from, and lo and behold, she sees what she calls a Nununui, which is the Cherokee, one of the Cherokee names for Bigfoot, and it's the name that you would hear more common that she would use, and it was I forget what it actually means, but anyway, and she said this Nununui was running really fast, but it was hunched over, but it was holding its belly, and she said it was running like it was hurt, and it ran down, and there was it ran down to the creek, and that was down below her, and she said that there was an area there, a bend in the creek, and there was a bunch of debris and stuff, a bunch of limbs and leaves and trash washed up in the roots of a tree that was right on the creek bank, right there where the creek had been up out of the banks, and there was just a whole bunch of debris and trash there. And she said the thing laid down in that stuff and raked a bunch of it over itself, and she said in just a matter of seconds it covered itself up with in this debris. And then she says she hears guys yelling and hollering and talking and stuff, or coming down the side of the mountain, and she says they're not coming near as fast as what the Nununui came, and so she got up and took off and ran and got the hell out of Dodge, and she ran back to their home. Well, she had, I can't remember how many brothers she had, but anyway, she told a couple of her older brothers about this. And Well, they didn't want to go back up there while the white guys were in the area because they would also be harassed because they were just teenagers. But see, they waited a prudent amount of time and went back up there and went there to where the thing had covered itself up, and it wasn't there. It was gone. And they couldn't tell. I don't remember now. She didn't. I don't remember her ever mentioning anything about finding blood or anything like that.
Right.
But they found, no sign of it. It was long gone. But the thing about the way it came down there, and even though she said she was pretty sure it had been shot in the belly, and that it laid down and covered itself up. And I don't know if if it was mortally wounded or what, or if that's a normal thing that it did. Maybe it thought it couldn't get away or what. I don't know. But that was a story that was told, and I thought it was pretty dadgum interesting.
Yeah, you've told me that story before. I've heard you tell it several times, and it's one of my favorite stories, just because it came from your grandmother.
It's my great grandmother.
Your great grandmother. Yeah,
and she was full-blooded Cherokee. Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason for that story to be made up or anything like that. And
right,
it talks about actual behavior.
Right.
One of the possible ways that they have stayed hidden all this time.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty amazing about it covering itself up.
Yeah, but she would be talking about things about nature in the woods, and she referred to them as just like she was talking about a deer, or they were just perfectly normal to her as a deer or a turkey or a fox or anything in the woods. I mean, it was nothing unusual. In fact, they one of the things another thing that when they would plant a garden, they would plant one up there around their home and for them, but then they would go back against the edge of the woods and they would plant another one for the Nununui. And so they always they would plant two gardens. And I remember that they said that they respected their territory. If they were out on a hunting party, if the men were on a hunting party and shot a deer and it ran off up in a hollow or something that was in the in the Nunui's territory, they wouldn't just go after it. They would go get their medicine man or shaman or whoever their holy man was, and they would have a little ceremony and say prayers, say prayers to the Nununui, and then they would go in, find the deer, and they would always leave it a choice piece. They would leave it a hind quarter or something like that, and before they would bring the rest of the deer out. And
I always, to this day, if I kill a deer or something, I'll cut the select meats out, like the liver, the heart, the lungs, and I'd always put it on a stump or a leaning tree or a tree that's blowed over or something like that. I never throw it on the ground. I don't know if Booger actually collects it. I'm sure he gets his fair share because when a rifle shot happens in the South, that's just like ringing the dinner bell. A lot of hunters lose their game after the fact. I mean, Tim and me have talked about it, Coonbo, that you can follow a blood trail and you think that sucker done bled smooth out, and you come upon a spot that looks like a dang slaughterhouse, and then the deer's not there. And you won't find another drop of blood unless you know what you're doing, and you get lucky and see where something has physically toted that deer off, and it would, due to the blood flowing from the deer's nostril, you might see a drop every now and again.
Yeah. That happened down there in Texas, once again outside Jefferson, with our friend and former research partner Crystal,
Yep.
her son Gerald and one of his friends had been out deer hunting, and it got pretty late, and they finally saw one. And I believe it was Gerald's friend that actually took the shot, but it wasn't a kill shot. It just wounded it, and
Mm-hmm.
it was right at sundown. They stayed out there and lost the trail. They had to go home, which is not something hunters like to do. They were
Nope.
young, inexperienced guys, and so the next morning, as soon as dawn took over, Crystal hit the woods to find this deer. And she went down to where they shot it and found the blood trail and everything and followed the blood trail and got to the point where it looked like the area where the deer should be at, but the deer wasn't there. And she looked around. She finally found just a couple of drops of blood and saw kind of like a beaten down path and started following it. And they're just, like you're saying, one or two drops of blood, maybe every 20 yards or so, like hardly anything. And she got, I want to say probably like a half mile down off in the woods there. And by this time, it was back in the woods. At first, the initial blood trail headed towards the creek. And then this other one went back off into the woods away from the creek. And, hunters know this. Whenever an animal's injured, a lot of times it will go to water.
Straight to it.
So that was normal behavior, and then the turn going back into the woods was pretty odd. But anyways, about a half mile from where they shot it, she found this deer. It was in the woods, and there was just this small clearing, and the deer was laying in the middle of this small clearing, and all the leaf debris and pine needles and everything had been cleared out away from the deer and made like a big circle around the deer. And the deer was on, clean soil. And she sent me pictures of this deer carcass, and it looked like somebody had taken one end and somebody had taken the other, and they just twisted it as tight as they could.
Ripped it apart.
Ripped it apart. And it was just twisted and twisted and twisted. And, sometimes, coyotes will get a hold of them and they'll be fighting over it or something, and you can see where they'll pull it apart or something like that. But, without getting too graphic, there weren't any areas where coyotes normally feed on. Coyotes and stuff will start at the rear end and work their way through because it's the softer tissue.
Well, it's not only that. Coonbo will confirm this. He's a hunter like I am. If a coyote pack gets a hold of a deer, it looks like a dang slaughterhouse. In other words, they're fighting over every scrap of meat. The hide is ripped and tore from hell to breakfast. I mean,
they chew the ribs down to nubbins.
Right.
Yeah, and they're fighting over it constantly. I mean, and this carcass is pulled and pushed and prodded and yanked around. And if a coyote gets a hold of a deer or a dog or anything like that, that carcass will be scattered within probably a large living room type area. I mean, pretty dang good. It's not just right there.
But it won't be twisted.
Right.
Nope, it won't be twisted.
And this was twisted, and it was all in one piece. None of the exposed bones had any chew marks on them, and the deer was pretty much intact except for what she could tell was some of the internal organs. She saw intestine and stomach, but she didn't notice anything else. And it was just kind of a weird scenario. You don't know what happened, but it's interesting.
Yeah. There was a place I used to hunt years ago, and I had permission to hunt on this one piece of property that was right next to the home property of these two guys that I knew. It was their grandfather's property, and sometimes we'd meet up and go hunt. And then of course we could hunt. Those boys could hunt both places. Now I would never go on their grandfather's property unless I was with them. But anyway, I'd gone down there that morning, and I thought we were going to hunt there on the grandfather's place, and I pulled up in front of their house, and sat there, and normally they'd come out, but I didn't want to dare blow my horn or anything because their dad worked shift work, and if I woke him up, my ass had been grassed, and so I just pulled up in front of their house, sat there with the engine idling for a little bit, and they never did come out, so I just, backed. I waited about 15 minutes. I backed out and went on up there to on that other piece of property that I had permission to hunt on, and I hunted actually on the opposite side of the road from where these boys, their grandfather's property was, and I don't know, probably 9 o'clock or so, I heard a shot over there. It sounded like it came off the grandfather's property, and later on, it was pretty cold, about 10:30 or so. I walk back up to the truck. Well, there's the younger of the two brothers, and he's come up there, and he said, and I said, "Is that you shooting?" He said, "Yep." And I said, "What'd you get?" At this time, deer had not been in North Alabama for very long, in that part of North Alabama. So, if you even got a spike, that was considered a trophy. Well, he'd killed a 4-point, a forkhorn, and so he was real proud of it. And in that area at that time, that was a nice trophy. And he said, "Well, I drug it as far as I got it across the creek, and it's down there at the bottom of the hill, and then boy, it's a real steep drag, real steep hill up from down in the creek bottom where he'd killed the thing up there to the top where we were all parked." And he said I'm gonna go get Jared, my brother, and we'll go down there and get that deer. And I said, "Well, I'll go with you." He said, "You don't need to worry about it." He said, "I know you've been hunting this one area." He said, "You go on back and hunt. I'll go get him. We'll get that deer out." Well, so I ate a can of beanie weenies, and he went to get his older brother, and I went off back in the woods. Well, that afternoon, I come up out of the woods, after dark, and well, where's their car? They didn't have a truck; they hunted out of a car, and I said, "Where's their car? Where they at?" So I drove down to their house, and I got down there, and well, they were being real sort of dodgy and real quiet and everything. What's going on? Where's the deer? Let me see the deer. Well, we ain't got it, and well, what do you mean you ain't got it? Well, somebody stole it. Well, what do you mean somebody stole it? They, that means they had to come off your granddaddy's property, and they'd had to come by, your house, your parents' house. I mean, what do you mean it got stolen? And they said, well, and anyway, so I got the older brother outside later on, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, you promise you won't tell anybody?" And I said, "Well, yeah, okay. Well, what?" He says, "Well, we went down there to get it, and we looked, and there was some old guy walking off through the woods, and had the deer across his shoulder, up on his shoulder, thrown over his shoulder. And we hollered at him and went running up there, going to try to catch him. And he turned around, and it was a booger, and and stole his deer. And he so they stole that kid's deer. I mean, that booger stole that kid's deer and toted it off. And of course, both of them had rifles, and but neither one of them thought about shooting it or anything. And of course, it would have been the wrong thing to do if they did. And at the time, those boys always their grandparents, their grandfather especially, he always wanted the heart and the liver and the tongue. So they hadn't even field dressed that deer, and they were going to field dress it after they got it back to the house. And so that thing picked up that whole deer, slung it over his shoulder, and toted it off. And
well, guys, it's right at 2 hours now.
Yeah.
And whenever me and Johnathan decided to start doing a podcast, we kind of agreed on a 45-minute mark was a good mark for doing a show.
Yeah, right.
I knew better with you two coming on, but I'm sure Jonathan feels the same way. Of course, we want to have you guys on again and everything.
Actually, Jonathan's asleep. I hear him snoring.
No, the
I
thing
guarantee
is,
he's glued to everything you said.
I've basically been put in a trance the whole time. I mean, I could listen to your guys' stories all day.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've run out of wind. You ought to be around some of our campfires when we have these get-togethers. I mean, Matt already knows this. I've said 1,000,000 times that if somebody would just sit over there to the side and turn on a recorder and just let it record, they would hear more information at one campfire than they'd ever get anywhere.
And
When you get our bumps,
probably a lot of stuff they didn't want to hear.
When I was talking to you on Saturday, there was like 12 stories that I still have to hear the end of it.
Oh, we've got more than just 12. I guess we've been blessed, or you can say cursed. It's however the way you want to look at it. But we have had a great deal of fun doing this. Me and Coonbo both. We decided back in 1999 when we got together that everybody wants to go with either Bear or with Coonbo, and that screws me and Coonbo up because when me and Coonbo get together, something happens. I mean, it's the camaraderie. We both know what we're doing. We don't have to tell each other what we're going to do. It's automatic. It's really strange how two complete strangers, one from Mississippi, one from Alabama, almost live the same life.
Well, you know what?
Go ahead.
I'll tell you, the crazy thing was, I remember the very first outing Bear and I went out on together. We went down to the Kelly Mattingly's uncle's property,
Goodman, Mississippi.
Yep, and we were out there, and they'd had some deer kills. They'd had some weird stuff going on. Well, and of course Bear's bullshitting and talking to the ladies and everything, and carrying on. Well, I'm just sort of keeping my mouth shut. I'm trying to size him up and figure out if he knows anything or if he really knows anything or not. But then just sort of looking at the country, the countryside and stuff, and we're easing along, and
This is when we're in the woods. We're not rolling anymore. We're
actually out in the woods. Yeah, we're about a mile away from we're about a mile away from the vehicles back into the sticks, and we're easing along. We're down in sort of a little old bottom, and it's all growed up thick and everything, following an old woods road or an old logging road or something, and we're easing along, and about the time my skin starts crawling and my hair starts standing up on the back of my neck, and I just stopped. And I'm back in the back, behind Bear and them, and he's, running his mouth, but not real loud, but, just talking. And all of a sudden he just stops. And he hadn't looked at me, and he wasn't even paying attention to me at all. He just stops, and he said, y'all hang on, And they said, what? And he says, he's a day in here. I'm thinking, he knows he knows that much. And then he'd been running his mouth so much, and he had a cold, and he had a sore throat.
Yep.
And he couldn't do any calling. He didn't know if I could call or anything. And and he comes back. He eases back here to me. He says, I think you're in here. And I says, I agree, they are. He says, can you do a call? I'm thinking, son of a bitch, I said, he knows. And I was astounded that anybody would even know to ask about a call.
How many people were doing calls at that time?
Nobody.
We were told that there was no way you could do one.
Right. And nobody was doing calls. I had been screwing around, playing with them for years,
And tell why.
Yeah.
We would hear them on our respective farms,
Yeah.
and we would also hear which calls would get responses.
Right.
I mean, when you're bored and you ain't got nothing better to do, you just listen to what's going on around you, and we learn. Go ahead, Tim.
And I'd been screwing around with those calls and stuff for years,
and I had to, and Tim didn't know it, and I didn't know it with him.
Right. And he says, and Bear says, "Can you do a call? My throat's sore." And I'm thinking, I ain't told him about doing no damn call, and how does he know to ask me about a damn call? And I said, plus, how would he even know about a call anyway? I'm thinking. And I said, yeah, I can do a call. And he says, and I says, which one?
What kind of call do you want?
Yeah. I said, which one? You want me to do how many syllables? He says, do that 2-syllable call. Well, I knew exactly what he was talking about. and I said,
I was kind of feeling Coonbo out too, but Coonbo didn't know this either. And I did have a sore throat. And I knew that if he knew what he was doing, he knew exactly when I said a 2-syllable call what I was talking about.
Yep. And so I said, yeah, I can do it. And so I'm thinking, well, down in this damn holler, as thick as it is, it's going to be pretty dead down here. So it's going to have to be loud for it to carry. And so I sat there and I got my breath and I cut loose. And I didn't even get the second syllable out of my mouth, and it was a power line out through the woods. We were about, 20 yards from the power line. We could see it through the woods, and on the other side of the power line, the land went up into a steep ridge, and from right up there on top of that ridge, instantly, one screamed back at us, and instantly to our right from it, I don't know what direction that would have been. It's probably to the west.
It was that ridge. 40, it was the west. 40, you're right.
40, 50 yards to the west, the female cut loose with what we call the looting call, hollering up the little ones, and she hauled ass going straight away from us, hollering, screaming about every 100 yards or so, for the little, drawing the little ones with her, getting her in the male. He made one more call and he shut up. He lockjawed, and of course he didn't go running off. We knew he was up there watching us. He was covering their exit, and so we eased up where we could see up on the power line a little bit better and just stopped. And and Bear said, and I said. How'd you like it, caller? Was that a good call? And he said, oh, yeah, that was perfect.
And we will say this to make notes. It's nothing like the call you hear Matt Moneymaker makes. It's nothing like the call that you heard on Monster Quest. It's nothing like those calls.
Nothing like that. And then, so we got to talking about calls, and we got to, since the boogers has already busted and run, and we did a recon. And I did a little. We was wanting to know if the son of a gun was still there, so I did a little challenge call, and Bear was really surprised that I knew that particular call, and we got no answer back. So we knew that the big boy done slipped out of there, and it was safe for us to go up there and sneak around, do a recon. And Buddy, did we ever find a nursery area up there?
Yep, sure did.
I mean,
what y'all guys got to realize, it wasn't just me and Coonbo there. It was 2 other ladies there with us, and we was worried about their safety first and foremost. Because I didn't know how Tim would react, and Tim didn't know how I would react. But ever since then, I mean, me and Coonbo are the best 2 partners there is. Everybody always has their partner, and we don't get to do it as much as we used to, but and especially now since Coonbo lives in Missouri, but he'll be back in Alabama in a couple of years. We've already discussed this, and look out, bookers. That's all I can say.
Yeah. But I knew then on that one trip I learned, that he knew what the hell he was talking about, and I also knew that Kelly Mattingly was going to be one hell of a Sasquatcher. She goes, she already knew a lot more than she ever was letting on at the time, and she ended up being one of our main parts of our group. And
on the return trip, I brought Coonbo and them back towards my property, and I took him to this bridge. And what people don't realize is I actually manipulated the deer camp up there that's abutting my property. They didn't know where to discard all their carcasses, after they would clean them. And I said, well, hell, I know this bridge down here. Let's start dumping them off in it. We're not hurting nobody. And what I was doing, I was making a collection point for where boogers come to, and they still come to that spot to this day. And I can go to that spot right now and cast the footprint. And Tim will tell you this, because tell them when we pulled up there, what you find.
Well, we were easing along, going along up through there, and Bear had told me that we were going to stop up by this bridge, and he was running his mouth with the women and wasn't really paying attention. And I'm easing along up through there, and hell, we'd crossed several other bridges and everything. Well, all of a sudden I start coming up on this one bridge, and I looked off and it was fairly narrow, and I looked off the left-hand side of it, which would be off the driver's side of my truck, and there's a sandbar down below. Well, hell, from up on the damn bridge, I could see damn booger tracks all over that sandbar. And I stomped on the brakes, and I said, is this the one? And he looked around, and he said, yeah. He said, and I said, hell, there's booger tracks right down there. And
whenever a researcher has ever come to my place in Mississippi, and all they want is, I want a cast of a Bigfoot track. I want a cast of a Bigfoot track. I said, well, how bad do you want one? And that's all I ever dreamed of. I never even see a Bigfoot. I just want to cast one of their footprints. And I said, well, I ain't never give a damn about a footprint track, because all I've ever done was look for what made the track. I said, but I can take you where you get a cast wherever you want. And anytime anybody's ever come down from other states or whatever, and they just want a damn Bigfoot track, I can take them to that sandbar probably to this day and cast a track. But not when I manipulated deer camp into stashing the bodies there over 30-something years ago, that's got to be, it's a habit place. And I manipulated the deer camp to help me out. And that was even before I realized anything about people casting footprint tracks, because I never could see the sense in it. And
I'm the same way.
Yeah,
I have never by myself cast a single track. I've helped cast a few tracks, but I've never toted the stuff to cast tracks on my body, on my person into the woods. But I've helped some folks do it, that already had the stuff there. But I do not own a single cast track. I'm
but
like
how
Bear.
many have we helped people cast? Good.
Ain't no telling. And
hell, we got one of the biggest footprint tracks off of Coonbo's old trailer spot in northeast Mississippi. It was 22 inches, and gerbils out the ass, the whole 9 yards. I think Bubba Gump still has that track, don't he?
I think he does. Yeah, I believe he's still got it. Yeah. I measured one time on the back of our farm that was 22, and
that's a big footprint.
That's a big footprint. In fact, I found two of that dude's tracks, and I found a left one and a right one. Where he crossed a creek on the back of the farm.
And a lot of people think that the bigger the track, the bigger the booger. Well, if that's the case, we got them standing 20 feet tall out there, but that's not the case. They're just like humans. Some got big feet, some got little feet. It's just all in genetics.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing I like about that particular sandbar down there. We found 3-toed tracks. We found, and 5-toed tracks, and also found where they'd come up the bank, and we found good knuckle prints and thumb prints and stuff.
Yep.
In there. But
well, I'm going to cut you all off.
Yeah.
We're going to continue this in a part 2.
Yeah.
Well, this will probably be. We've probably already got 2 parts as it is, but we'll pick up the next time we get you guys on here.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we scratched the surface.
Y'all, we hadn't even started, man. But I guess Johnathan's already figured that out. It's like he said, he already had 12 incidents in his mind he wanted to discuss. I don't even think we hit one of them, have we?
Well, when I was talking to you on Saturday, right before we got off the phone, there was some story that you were telling me about where a guy would get dropped off in the woods by his sister, and I was like, what? And then you and Matt were like, that, Johnathan, that's not even the good stuff. And I was like,
no.
How could
Well, that's the thing. The next time we have you guys on, we'll have to line up our schedules and everything. I know, Bear, you're getting into the busy season. But
right.
Next time I definitely want to talk more about calls, where they came from and everything. And I'd kind of like to get into some taboo subjects that Bigfooters don't talk about or don't know about.
Well,
okay.
We can do that, can't we, Coonbo?
Yep. Yeah, we can.
But I appreciate you guys taking the time to come on here. You're always welcome. It's as much your show as it is mine.
Yeah.
Well, if y'all ever need us as a co-host or whatever, just figure out what we're doing, and we don't mind doing it, especially with Matt, and I'm sure it's going to end up being that way with Johnathan. But we are the Bigfoot Outlaws. We didn't choose that name. We was made outlaws by the community, and so we wear it with pride, and Matt's a big part of that. Actually, he's one of the co-founders of the group. And we love what we do, and we don't mind sharing, do we, Tim?
Nope. No, in fact, I like, I'd rather, just answer questions and stuff like that than telling the same stories over and over and over again that we've told, that we've told for years. But so often you need to tell the story to illustrate what we're, the knowledge that we're trying to impart,
it's not only that. It's not only that. Usually a question will throw us into a story that we haven't told before. I mean, that's what we have to use as our basis of knowledge is experience, and experience comes through the telling of the stories that we've done and experienced over our lifespan so far.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's some of them that we've told over and over. People want to hear them again and again, and there's some of the highlights of the things that we've run into over the years. But shoot, for every one that we tell, there's 25 or 30 that we haven't, or that very, very few people know about at all. And hell,
and I'm sure there's people out there scratching their heads. I mean, they're just dying to see their first one, and then somebody like me and Coonbo comes along, and we just spout them off, just like it's nothing to it. And I think that's a lot of why a lot of people resent us. They hate our guts, whether it's through jealousy or whatever. But, and it's not so much today as it has been in the past 8 to 15 years. It seems like we're getting a new breed of people out there that's more understanding and willing to try to listen, because it's like what Matt said earlier before we really started into all this. If you'll take some of the things we say we've tried and things we've done and apply it to your own, I hate the word research, but I'll use it that way. If you apply it to your own research, I promise you, if you do it correctly and with patience and with respect, you'll see the results. And Matt's living proof of that, and he's already said that he is.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jonathan, do you got any final questions?
He's scared to say something because we're liable to stay up about 3 more hours.
I probably worded that wrong. Jonathan, is there anything else you want to say right now?
I can't really think of any. I can't think of any final words other than it's been so good listening to both Coonbo and Bear share stories that I haven't heard before. You've had the pleasure of hearing these stories for years, but this is all new to me, so it's just been amazing soaking everything up, and I can't wait to hear more.
Yeah, I'll say this. Whenever we decided to do a show, we were talking about what kind of format we wanted to have, and we both really enjoy stories and having guests on that have actually had sightings and actually have something to contribute, because there's so many shows out there that are having these experts on that have never even seen one or seen a track. But the first thing Johnathan said is he wanted you guys on before anybody else. And at the time, I had talked about you guys, but I guess I hadn't really mentioned any names or anything. And I said, well, all I got to do is call them. And Coonbo? Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I've been.
It's been a blast, guys, and we appreciate it.
Certainly. Glad to do it.
And
glad to meet you, Jonathan.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you, and Bear, it was fun talking again.
Well, I'm sure this is just the beginning of a beautiful relationship until you start hating our guts.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for listening to another episode of Bigfoot Crossroads.